Hey, welcome back and a happy new year, everybody. We're back for 2016. Hi, Martin.
G'day, Paul.
Did you have a nice Christmas, mate?
I certainly did.
And you went over to
Brisbane.
Yeah, what was that like, mate?
Pretty good. Not too hot, good weather the whole time.
Yeah, because some areas have been having terrible fires, as usual.
Yeah.
Gosh, you hear about people being driven into the sea and, 50,000 hectares being burned.
Yeah, no, none of that in Brisbane.
Yeah, none of that here either.
No, certainly not here.
But plenty in aviation news over this holiday sort of summer period. It never stops. And the one that we're really excited about, let's start with it. And Singapore Airlines coming to Welly. Wow.
Yeah, that is pretty good, isn't it? Wellington, Canberra, Singapore, 4 times a week.
Okay, so we're getting the dog leg off the end of an Australian destination. That seems to be how it works.
Yes, that's the second flight announced this week that's going to dog leg through Aussie.
Oh, so the other one was who?
That's Kuala Lumpur, Coolangatta, Auckland.
What, AirAsia X?
AirAsia X.
Now, they used to fly to Christchurch, didn't they, for a while?
Yeah, the earthquake put pay to that.
And was that a direct from Kuala Lumpur?
I believe it was at the time.
And that was A330 or A340?
I think they did it with an A340 a few times. I'm not sure whether it ever went to A330.
Okay, so it will be an A330 probably into Auckland from Coolangatta.
Absolutely.
And A330 for Singapore Airlines from Canberra. Now, this is interesting because we've got two capitals going to be joined together here.
For the first time.
For the first time. And I believe that the direct flight, as it will be out of Wellington to Canberra and back the other way on Singapore, will be the only direct flight to Canberra out of New Zealand. Will that be right?
Yeah, that'll be it.
Interesting move.
Very interesting.
So that sort of puts Wellington sort of on the map because, well, Air New Zealand only offer narrow-body services. In fact, they've dialed them right back compared to how it was in the 80s and 90s with 3 or 4 767s coming through every day. With an aircraft, the capacity, of the A330 and then probably onto the A350, they've got some serious competition.
They do. I mean, of course, they're a Star Alliance partner, so there'll be a degree of code sharing and all that type of thing going on. But I think it's very telling that Singapore have been the ones to put their stamp on this route.
Yeah, I wonder how long the talking's been going on.
Yeah, I mean, reading in some of the forums, there has been talk about such a connection for coming up 20 years. Of course, not the onward to Singapore, but there has been talk of connecting Wellington and Canberra, but no one's ever seemed to do it. Now, Singapore have jumped in and done it. Interestingly, there's been a lot of talk as to whether the runway in Wellington can handle an A330, but some of those arguments were cut by people referencing videos on YouTube, your videos actually,
yes, I know,
of the 767s coming in.
Yeah, well, they were here every day in all sorts of conditions, no problem.
I remember them back in the early 2000s.
And also, it's not very far. I think you've done the math on how far it is. It's within a few miles or so of Melbourne or one of those sort of destinations. So not a huge fuel load, so no problem. But it does show you the potential going forward. And one thinks we've talked about Emirates, they could send a 777-300 ER here, again via an Australian city. Maybe even this move has happened because there was talk in the business behind the scenes that Emirates were considering that leg.
Absolutely. You wonder to what extent they've been forced into this. In terms of distance, it's about Wellington-Canberra is about 200 nautical miles less than Wellington-Melbourne and only about 60 nautical miles more than Wellington-Sydney.
And that puts about, 1,200 seats or so each way into the mix every week, I think 4 times. What do the A330s do, about 280, 290?
Yep.
And on up into the A350s, because that's going to be their majority aircraft type, isn't it, going forward? And that's well over 300. So, again, if you want to go to London on Singapore, you can leave out of Wellington. You don't need to consider Air New Zealand anymore because you don't need to go to Auckland.
Exactly, and that'd be, whatever you do, you're going to stop. So at least if you stop in Canberra or wherever the next airline decides to stop off, you're not going to have to wander between terminals and go through another security process and all that type of thing. So, I mean, personally, I'd be very interested. If I need to go to Singapore, Asia or Europe and that flight's available, I'd go for it.
Yeah. Also, you got to remember that there's Adelaide. Both Singapore and Emirates fly to Adelaide with no onward leg. Again, there could be an opportunity there. That could be where Emirates could find a market. Sort of makes sense to link the capitals, doesn't it? There's going to be some business and some traffic in its own right between those two centres generated by government, you would think?
Definitely, diplomats and that going between they are very closely related, the two countries, and have a lot to do with each other, so why wouldn't they?
So if you're Air New Zealand and you wanted to counter that, do you put more A320s on, or do you think about putting a 76 back in. They could still got 5 of them, or even a 7879 to go somewhere. Would you have to do something?
Well, that's the thing. Air New Zealand doesn't really have anywhere to go on to from Canberra. I mean, Singapore, it's a natural fit.
So you'd have to have some reason, but you could still lose Trans-Tasman traffic.
You'll definitely lose some Trans-Tasman traffic.
Especially out of Wellington market, which they sort of have neglected a bit.
Yeah. No, yeah. So for Singapore, it's great. They get to join 2 capital cities, haven't been joined before with each other or with Singapore. They've obviously got a bit of spare capacity, A330-300 lying around. Test the market, see how it goes.
Right. It puts a bit of pressure on hurrying up with the runway extension as well, because again, you're seeing opportunity.
You're seeing opportunity, and I also think for Virgin, it's a great deal of opportunity, because Virgin's gone obviously full service. They're competing directly with Qantas. They'll be competing directly with Qantas for all the government accounts and all that type of thing. So now that there's going to be a lot of demand within Canberra, or not a lot, but there's going to be demand within Canberra from diplomats, and it's saying, look at Virgin when you do your travel buys, because we want to go direct to Wellington. We don't want to take a Dash 8 to Sydney and then hang around for 2 hours.
Yeah.
The announcement's going to be made next week sometime, apparently, and they'd probably say in the second half of 2016. It tends to be the way these things go.
All right. Well, that's...
it's big news.
It is big news, and it's going to enhance the business and tourism opportunities for the greater Wellington area.
Having said that, in terms of how long announcements take, AirAsia X announced... They let out some rumours via their Twitter account and everything last week saying they're considering New Zealand. Now they've announced it and said it's starting in March. So obviously AirAsia X is capable of moving pretty quickly when it comes to it.
Well, you've got to build the hype and then you have to follow through pretty quick. The thing again with them is that they go to a lot of places. So you're in that network. You can wind up all the way to Europe, can't you?
And they're already offering, $99 one way to Coolangatta, and I think it was $249 onto KL and $599 in their business class, which has got lie flat beds. So for $1,200 business class to KL and back, not bad.
The onslaught down under continues. Turkish now looking at eyeing up Australia. That's a very long haul service, Turkey to Australia, right?
They are looking at direct, so that would be Istanbul, Sydney, up to 18 hours.
Whoa, so what sort of aircraft that really narrows it right down to what?
777LR at this point.
They wouldn't be looking to have a new build. They'll be looking around. There's quite a few seem to be traded on the sort of second-hand market these days because they're very specific mission aircraft, aren't they?
Very specific. There's always a few knocking around.
Yeah. Okay.
Although I'm pretty sure if they wanted a new one, Boeing is desperate to sell legacy 777s at the moment, and it's not difficult for them to make an LR.
Yeah, I guess it's got the 300 wings and engines and the 200 ER
pretty much it. So if they ordered it, they could probably have it in 2018.
Yeah, still very expensive one-off purchase there.
Yes. And
mind you, they want to keep that line open.
Yep.
And they're a big 777 customer, Turkish.
They might be willing to talk.
They got a few problems. They've had the suicide bomb attack in Istanbul in the last few days. That airline is all about getting as many people to Turkey as possible, either to travel there as a tourist or to use as a hub to go on somewhere else. That could cause them a bit of grief.
Yes.
Any sort of onslaught from the evildoers to destabilise their tourism business would directly impact on Turkish Airlines, wouldn't it?
Turkey's always prided itself on keeping a lid on things in quite a, uptight part of the world. And this is not what they wanted at all. It's really, really bad.
I remember we were talking a while back last year. We were speculating Turkish might be a possibility for the A380. Nothing ever came of that.
No.
And at the time also those Skymark A380s, this is the airline in Japan that sort of went belly up or in some sort of bankruptcy protection because I think they're still operating, aren't they? Anyway, those A380s have sat in Toulouse sort of with the wrappers on. And now we hear that All Nippon Airways is taking them, and I think they've taken over responsibility for the debts, haven't they?
Yep.
Of Skymark Airways. And they said they're going to operate them to Hawaii, 3 of them. Could that just be the beginning of a flood of orders to Japanese carriers if this works out?
I think it's a very interesting order. So the reason for the whole order is it's all around slots at Haneda Airport in Tokyo.
Right.
And Delta was after them and actually had Airbus backing.
Oh.
Yeah, Airbus was siding with Delta on this for whatever reason. I don't know, because obviously Delta's a big Airbus customer. That must have something to do with it. But anyway, halfway through, Airbus saw the opportunity, switched sides to ANA, talked ANA into taking the A380s as a sort of market tester and to basically maximize the number of slots at Haneda, which ANA was desperate not to lose, because that's a very congested yet very, very popular airport basically in downtown Tokyo.
And when you say slots, it really doesn't matter what aircraft you apply to that. It's just a slot to arrive or depart.
Yeah, it's just to keep the slots open.
Right.
Yeah.
It's your time in the queue, basically.
Yes. But if they can operate A380s from Haneda to Hawaii, that frees up a whole lot of slots, because normally they would have had limited time to use those slots. The quicker you can fill up a plane and get it out, you can use those slots for something else.
Yeah.
So if you can get 460 people into an Airbus and get them out of there, instead of flying two 787-900s or whatever,
you've got another slot free to you.
Yeah, you can fly somewhere else from there.
They've always been big to Hawaii, the
Huge.
Japanese. It's a honeymoon destination. It's one of those sort of idyllic...
And there's a huge a big Japanese population there.
Of course, remember the guy out of Hawaii Five-0?
There you go.
Yeah, I forget what that character was. But okay, so ANA and JAL have always been big on large fleets of wide bodies. Boeing, and not the 74 anymore, now 777-300 standards and ERs.
Yeah.
But, you know, if this works out, because I imagine JAL also has those slot issues at the airport you're talking about.
You know, the Airbus has been trying to crack the Japanese market ever since they've been around. And, you know, there were a few A300s and this and that operating, but they've always been Boeing loyal.
The main two, yeah.
And in 2014, they managed to switch JAL. So JAL went off and bought a whole lot of A350s, which surprised a lot of people.
Yes, I remember that, yeah.
But ANA has always been the difficult nut to crack.
Well, they've always had A320s and A321s, though, ANA.
But only a few.
Yeah.
Never many. And it was basically, we'll buy a few just to keep you happy.
Right.
And by all accounts, they've been very happy with them.
Yeah.
But they've never expanded their fleet.
Yeah.
Well, now they've gone real big and, taken these three A380s, which you'd have to think is the beginning. It's, it's the thin end of the wedge.
Surely with Japan and the legacy or the history of operating those 747 SRs, and I think they've got domestic 777s that also have got maxed out 550 seats or something crazy like that, that as those, let's say those old Emirates, well, no, they're not old, but the former Emirates frames, there's lots of them, come off and they're replaced by the orders that they already have in place, the new ones. You'd start to think that maybe an airline like ANA or JAL would start to think about an 800-seater A380 domestic version for Japan. Again, maximising slots. And look at the oil price, man. I mean, when you get oil going so low and you're putting that many bums on seats, it costs hardly anything to move them, especially over a short distance.
Yeah, the oil price is having a huge effect, isn't it?
I see the Royal Bank of Scotland, someone there in their interest rate section was commenting on the possibilities of global deflation, and one of the items obviously mentioned was oil, and now they're talking about oil under $10 a barrel. Seriously, can you believe that?
That's amazing, isn't it?
I mean, think about what it used to be.
Yeah.
Now, airlines are going to get blowout profits. I think they're describing some of the US carriers' potential blowout profits because of the reduction purely in the price of oil.
It's incredible. The lowest price since 2003 at the moment, I think.
Yeah, but it could end up being one of the lowest prices ever relative to...
Oh, yeah, because it's the lowest price since 2003 now, and it's like hovering around $30. Wait till it gets to 16, 15, 14, etc.
Well, you're getting back to Kero a gallon of sort of what it used to be back in the 60s, 70s.
You know, a lot of people have discussed this. They're saying, well, as the demand for oil falls, as people buy electric cars, which in the next 10 years is only going to happen more and more and more...
Of course.
The price of oil for aviation will go down.
There you go. People will be flying to work in one of those personal drones, though.
Wow, that was amazing, isn't it?
Don't you want one of them?
Wow.
That can only get better.
Yeah, you know,
and that's just electricity.
A little pod and 2.5 hour charge time.
Yeah, and ballistic parachute in case you get into trouble.
I'm pretty sure you will get into trouble in the early days.
Some people will, but it just shows you where it's going. Speaking of orders, new orders, Virgin going for A350s. They're replacing it says their leisure fleet. What's that, the 74s?
Basically, the 74s are going to be replaced with A350 1000s. Wow. So they've gone for the big one. Yeah,
they're spending quite a bit of money, over $4 billion.
Yeah, 12 of them.
Which shows you that Virgin must, the cash flow's still there, obviously.
Yeah, and they're going to save even more money.
He was very early in on the A340, remember?
Yeah.
Like really early. He had some of the first ones.
Yeah.
I remember Lady Di, christening them.
Yeah, what was it? 4 for long haul, or whatever you had stuck on the side of the planes?
That's right, 4 for long haul.
Because that was about the time that British Airways were rolling out their 777s, wasn't it?
Yeah, no love lost between the two.
No.
But yeah, gosh, those were the days. So I wonder if there was a huge offer on the table from Boeing to give them, again, cheap 777s in that situation. Because, Virgin Australia has them.
Yes, they do. But there's always talk of Virgin, not always talk, but there's quite a lot of rumour about Virgin Australia actually ditching them because they're too much plane for the job that they've got.
Right.
They apparently don't seem to be filling them all the time.
Okay, so more like a 788 or 9.
And it was very interesting that
they got LA in those things, don't they?
Yeah, they do. When Airbus took their A350 down there, remember, they did spend quite a lot of time in the Virgin hangars in Brisbane.
That's right. Yes, that's right. They did.
They did.
And we were wondering at the time if that meant anything, if I remember rightly.
Yeah. And Virgin have also, they're going to have to upgrade their short-haul fleet soon. And you just wonder whether they're going to stick with the 78 MAX, which you'd have to expect they would. They've just got so many of them now. Or would they also jump over to the A320
Well,
Neo?
EasyJet did it.
They did. They did indeed.
At a huge magnitude, too. They had over 100 737s.
Yes.
And they're already on their second massive order of Airbuses now. They never went back.
Yeah.
Speaking of 737 airlines, Ryanair, 100 million passengers in the last
100 million
year.
passengers.
100 million on just over 280 planes.
And what did we work out the other day? 280 planes at 180 seats each, divided by 100 million. We worked out that those planes had to fly every day of the year with like 150 people on them all the time.
Yeah, that's right. What, 6 or was it 8 flights a day?
8 flights a day or something. Yeah, crazy.
Boy, they pack them in. They get them, don't they?
Yeah. I mean, Ryanair is doing some very interesting stuff that I didn't know. I didn't realize that in Greece, there's actually, bizarrely enough, the most profitable airline in Europe at the moment is a Greek airline called Aegean.
Isn't Greece broken?
Exactly. But this airline's run really well. They've done all the sums right. They're very conservative in terms of borrowing money and everything. And they are the most profitable airline in Europe at the moment. And the managing director said what keeps us working very hard is the fact our competition, even for internal flights within Greece, is Ryanair. They've got planes based at Athens that only fly within Greece.
Okay, and that's an interesting part of their model. It's one airline, but it's really a whole lot of little separate airlines, isn't it?
Yeah, sort of, yeah.
Operating out of hubs in their own particular areas.
The Hungarian airline Wizz Air is quite similar. It's a low-cost airline that happens to be based in Hungary. They do the same thing. They do internal flights within the Czech Republic and things like this, all under one banner, but they operate as a sort of modular little airline.
Again, Ryanair, that size fleet, that number of people, and gas just going down all the time. It can just only, at that scale, just get so much better every time, doesn't it?
Well, talking about cheap gas and the opportunities it brings, see, Icelandic is getting some 767s because they can't get enough people on their 75s out of their main hubs, which is Heathrow.
Same type certificates or operating.
So they're going to be operating full 76s out of Heathrow.
Now, another item of news that caught the attention, because it's been a while since we've seen it, and that is the old fifth engine slung under the wing of the Qantas 747-400.
Brought back memories.
Well, we've seen that in the past, because the 74's always had that capability, haven't they?
Yep.
I think it's only under the left wing only.
Yep.
Sounds like the problems they had in Johannesburg caused quite a few PR issues.
Yes.
People were stranded for a long time, and it wasn't perhaps dealt with in the best way, which is a reoccurring story, that one, isn't it?
Yeah, they're running on a knife edge these days, don't they?
Yeah.
But it also shows you how far the 74's gone, because in the old days when a lot of airlines were operating 747s to Johannesburg, you could have pretty much guaranteed that there would have been a spare RB211 knocking around.
Yeah.
Now there's I don't know who else operates 74s to Johannesburg on a regular basis.
BA is the only one.
Well, they're A380 to Joburg.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
So yeah, I don't know who does operate.
Well, probably hardly anyone. Hence the reason they had to do that.
Yeah, fly their own engine over.
It's interesting to see how they set it up. It's sort of just held on by a couple of bolts by the looks of things. It's not even totally fared over the wing engine pylon join.
They take the fan off. They put a fairing over where the fan blades would have been mounted. And there's a sort of a strut that holds it on, and there's a localizer strut that comes in from near the undercarriage and goes across to stop it wobbling. Yeah. And that's basically it.
And I think that fairing puts the air either around the nacelle or through those little bypass areas around the because the main fan's not in there, is it?
No, it took it off.
But it's got the fairing that goes in the hub of the
And
the fan.
they had to fly via Perth instead of direct as they normally go, Sydney, Joburg. So they went Sydney, Perth, Johannesburg.
They had to gas up.
And yeah, it took a bit longer apparently.
And then they shipped the faulty engine back by sea, so no point in spending too much there.
No.
Which tells me they must have quite a few engines knocking around.
Well, yeah.
They can do with one out of the system for a while.
Yeah.
I think it was reported that there was some sort of bang, wasn't there, on takeoff, throttle up? So obviously it threw something. There's been no news as to what was damaged there, but I don't know, fan blade came off. Or...
Well, you wonder when Joburg's going to go A380 for Qantas.
They might need some more.
Because I've been on that flight twice and it was always packed.
Yeah. And there's some good photos doing the rounds. I'm sure most of our serious listeners and viewers have seen those. But, yeah, I mean, one sort of these days forgets that they can do that.
Yeah. Yeah. But
I'm just trying to think back if Air New Zealand ever had to do that. They probably did at some point back in the day. Can't quite remember it specifically. I remember seeing a picture of a Qantas 74300 with a fifth engine sort of stuck under the wing there.
Apparently you can only do it with Pratt and Rolls-Royce engines. You can't do it with GEs.
Oh, okay.
Maybe something to do with the way they're mounted.
Maybe.
But I'll look into that because that seems a bit odd, but that's what people are saying.
Well, it's a bit of a compromise, though now there seems to be little demand for hauling them around like that.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah.
Martin, you were telling me about quite an interesting sort of analysis of how the different carriers, the big carriers in the States, do their operations. And it's interesting to sort of read through because you get an idea of the philosophy, perhaps, of the airline. Southwest Airlines, we've all flown on Southwest who've been to the States. They like to go high. They like to get up, climb fast, get high, and stay there for as long as possible, no matter what.
Yeah,
right?
This was an air traffic controller on one of those Reddit Ask Me Anything forums.
Yeah.
And he said, Southwest's get to altitude as quickly as possible, then request a direct routing from ATC once they're up there.
Yeah.
And they normally get it because they're high and getting out of there as quickly as they can.
Yeah.
They said the other airlines are all varying degrees of, conservatism. American Airlines is constantly asking for ride reports. Right. Is it bumpy? Is it bumpy? Is it bumpy?
So that's part of their customer service model, is to not take them through too much turbulence if they can help it.
I think it was United and Delta both didn't like sharp turns, so they were always asking to be routed in long, wide turns before they needed to.
It's a bit boring for the pilots, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like the sharpest turn you'll ever do is one that you hardly even notice.
And apparently all these things that they have to do, like asking for ride reports and everything, it's all in the airline operating. They have to do it. And it's all about building their brand. But apparently, it's a big thing. All the this air traffic controller was saying that the airlines all have very specific differences that they like to sort of promote and that they work upon.
Incredible, isn't it?
Yeah.
Malaysian Airlines, what was going on?
That was bizarre.
They had this, it's described as a baggage fiasco.
Hmm.
Now, what was happening there? They were loading flights from Kuala Lumpur to London or Europe without the baggage. And what were they flying the baggage separately? Is that what was going on?
Well, I haven't actually got to the bottom of how the bags were then getting there. But can you imagine flying through KL off to a northern winter and the airline suddenly announces they're not taking your suitcases because now apparently the reason they gave was adverse winds meant they had to fly slightly longer. And you're like, well, that's just rubbish. Singapore and Thai were taken off and they were taking everyone's suitcases with them. They were flying through the same winds.
Yeah, so they probably had a security threat.
I expect that maybe they'd lost control of the baggage screening.
And they had to put something drastic in place immediately.
Won't take any suitcases.
And then try and sort of make up some sort of story to cover it.
Yeah, make it up. Yeah, literally make it up. A really bad story. Oh, it's a bit windy, so we're leaving all your suitcases
Which would never stand up to any journalistic scrutiny, which they're obviously going to get at some point. It'll be interesting to see if this is further reported.
I think they're quite lucky in terms of journalistic scrutiny in regard to aviation stories, because I don't think there is too much really, is there?
Well, it's...
Because they'll say, Malaysian Airlines, and they'll show a picture of a Fokker trimotor.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, from the 30s.
Yeah.
Yeah, as if it
flying over Sri Lanka.
A couple of other issues to talk about. This is one that provokes a lot of discussion in pilot forums and everywhere, really. And that is the whole question of manual flying skills. Quite an interesting article in one of the websites here about how there's a claim here that the feds in the US aren't tracking pilots' manual flight skills. They're saying that they're losing those skills because they're relying primarily too much on flight automation. And they're saying this is leading to the inability to deal with anything that comes up. They cite an example, the Asiana Airlines crash Flight 214 at San Francisco as an example, where there was a reliance on automation, faulty automation, badly set up automation, all the way to, the cartwheel moment, and it goes on. It's probably about time that this is looked into, isn't it? Because there have been too many examples of when the automation is somehow malfunctioning or not functioning properly, that a lot of pilots are caught in a situation where they really don't know what to do.
Yeah.
When the pressure's on, particularly.
And especially when you're coming off these pilot production lines, which, you spend a lot of time in simulators. The minimum amount of time actually behind the controls of a light airplane doing unusual attitudes and all this type of thing, straight into procedural trainers, straight into simulators, and then, hey presto, 3 months later you're doing your first line flight.
The comments that I'm referring to are from the Department of Transportation Inspector General. It's a report, that's a US body. They're saying neither the airlines nor the FAA consistently ensure pilots are trained for manual control. Maybe it's time to go back to the old days of actually doing a certain amount of training, even the slightly risky training in the real plane. Remember back in the 60s and 70s, before flight sims were at the level of certifying sort of zero flight time and put you straight on the line to sort of complete it, they'd be doing engine out, touch and goes, or loss of engine on takeoff for real. With the real plane.
Don't do that anymore.
And when it's real, it gives you an added sort of
focusing,
doesn't it? Yeah. Anyway, so we'll watch that one. There's been no response from the FAA yet, and that pretty well takes us to the end of our first program for 2016. Who'd have thought we would have lasted this long, Martin?
That's really
I think we're into our fifth year.
Really?
I think we're approaching our fifth year.
Wow.
Yeah, I believe we are. Yeah,
that's amazing.
We're definitely through our 4 years.
Wow, I know. Yeah, okay.
Let's retrace.
I thought we'd only be doing it a couple of months. Short-term memory.
Okay, I see. Maybe you should get a few tests done on that one. Well, you seem to be able to remember stuff to do with aviation. That's all that really matters for this program. So anyway, it's good to be back in 2016. There'll be plenty to talk about. Next program, we'll start looking back at some of the aircraft of the day. Maybe we should look at that new Chinese stealth fighter.
That's interesting.
Getting the Western defence establishment a little nervous, right?
Worrying quite a lot of people.
What's the name of it?
The J-20 or something?
Yeah, well, let's look at that next program. Because, if they're up to that level, then...
Yes. Well, the Chinese call it fourth generation. The West is calling it fifth generation, which is right up there with what the latest stuff the West is producing.
Okay.
Yes.
So
Super Cruise the business.
We'll look at that next program. Great to hear about the Singapore Airlines into Wellington thing. That's a real development. So, good to be back. In the meantime, Paul Brennan in Welly.
And Martin Noakes in Welly.
We'll see you again.
Cheers.